All right, in this one I want to talk about written language and specifically the alphabet. But before doing so, I want to stress that this is the equivalent of a written rough draft. If I were going to take the topic that I will be speaking on and write it out, what I'm about to go into would be that initial first rough draft. Meaning, I don't know if there's actually anything to this. It's just something that kind of popped into my head and I've been messing around with a little bit. And it's interesting enough that I feel like I should share it now as opposed to sit on it and develop it further in my mind. And you'll see what I mean as I get into it. But I wanted to stress that at the beginning in case you listen to this and think, really, you made me sit through that and entertain this silly thing you've been thinking about. I just wanted to warn you that the end result of you listening to this could be that. So keep in mind, this is a rough draft. But disclaimer aside, first I'm going to read something that I wrote in May of 2014. And I really cannot believe that it was May of 2014 when I wrote this, because it seems like it was 2 years ago that I was in this mindset, immersed in all of these things and writing about them. But next May, that'll be 10 years ago, which is just unbelievable. But in that post, I write, the development of written language is analogous to a sort of neurolinguistic software technology designed to alter the human operating system. And of course, back then, I thought I was so smart and so intelligent, and I had so much to say about what was going on in the world, and I had it all figured out at the time. And as I've become more aware of what is going on, I have also become aware of just how not intelligent I am when it comes to these things and how much I don't know when it comes to these things. But back then, I had it all figured out, and that was something that I wrote about the idea of language itself, what it is, where it came from. And in the context of the blog post that I was writing about, I speculated in the direction that language was a sort of program that someone had downloaded into our mind. In other words, we did not create it on our own. It was given to us. And that may or may not be true. I don't know. And you'll see what I mean as I get into what I want to talk about today. And this is the rough draft part, which is that the letters themselves seem to correlate precisely with the movement of the tongue and your mouth and the vocal cords as you make the noise that the letter is associated with. Depending on the letter, you could view it as starting from a still point and then expanding out, like with the letter G, or it could be more like expanding out and consolidating back down to that point, like with the letter O. As I'll get into further, with letters like G, you start from a single point to express the vibration of that sound, and it expands out in the shape of the letter G as the sound waves explode through your vocal cords and out through your mouth to make the sound that the person perceives. While on the flip side, with something like the letter O, you start out with everything in the position of an O, and then it consolidates down to the point as you make that vibration come through. O. And if you do this with me as I go through all of this, you'll see what I mean. You say, oh, and you start out with a large circle with your lips and your mouth and tongue, and it eventually condenses down into a singular point. And G is the exact opposite, where you start condensed, and then you go G, G, and it expands from that central point into the letter G. You can see it in your mind's eye if you pay attention to the movement of your chin and lips and jaw and tongue and everything that goes along with making that sound. You can see how it starts from that center point, right where that little line comes across. You have the half circle part of the G, which comes like a C all the way around, and then it comes up and makes that line, and it's like you're right at that line point condensed, and then you go G, and your mouth expands out into that C to make that noise. So I'm sure a lot of you heard that and said, what? What are you talking about? Well, okay, let's just start at the beginning with the letter A. It would be easy to state in esoteric terms that the letter A and all of the rest of the letters are sigils. They are symbols that have been charged with a certain energy that expresses itself as meaning. Especially when the individual sigils are put together in certain ways that form words that are further charged with meaning, that express a sort of gravitational pull on whoever is perceiving them. And in that way, a lot of people point to how the modern alphabet can be traced back to the more hieroglyphic forms of alphabets that were symbolic. They were pictures in essence. And a lot of the Eastern languages like Japanese and Chinese have held on to that tradition even more so than the Western countries that speak English or Spanish have. Which I suppose are all derivations ultimately of Latin and then going back further to Hebrew. Which is then very similar to Phoenician. And that's where we get the term phonetic to describe the process of sounding out a word. Hooked on phonics worked for me. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So it'll probably be easier to imagine the actual letter in your mind as I'm going through this. For example, the letter A. Say the letter and the sound that is associated with it, and imagine the symbol in your mind's eye. A. 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 Pay attention to the motion of your mouth, your lips, very closely when you say A. If you pay attention to it when you finish saying A, I'm doing it right now. This might have been a good video to make with my face, but anyway. When you're in the finished position of saying A, your chin is sort of holding 2 points, which are the bottom of the A, and your upper lip is making the top point of the A, and your lip is coming across in the middle, which is the bar that goes from the two lines forming the A. So now imagine that in your mind. Say it again. A. 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 Your mouth is making the shape that is the letter A. And then next you go to B. 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 Do you see how your lips come together and pop like that? And when you have them together, when you're about to start saying B, your upper lip, the middle of it, touches the bottom lip, B, and then when you actually make the noise that is B, you have the two spaces form in between your upper lip and your lower lip as you express the sound. You literally make the shape of the letter B. It's just on its side. But if you imagine the B facing down on its side like that, it's as if the sound waves are coming through the two holes in the structure of the B. So you say B, and the sound waves are coming through those two holes that are made by the top of your upper lip and how close it is to the middle of your bottom lip as they separate. That's the indent of the two half circles on the B. And the sound waves are coming through there as you go B, B. It's wild stuff, right? Again, maybe I'm just making this up. Maybe this is just my creative imagination gone wild, or gone wrong, however you want to perceive it. But regardless, let's continue. Put another way, perhaps the letters themselves are actual structural engineering to the point where they represent the lattice through which the sound waves escape the vocal cords and the mouth. The shapes you are making are those letters. It's a form of engineering that you are being shown when you look at the letter B, for example. Hey, look, when you make this noise, this is the structural engineering that's taking place within your body and your mouth specifically. Which, if true, adds an extra layer of complexity to the language that we are speaking and to the alphabet through which the language is derived. It's one thing to speculate that it is some kind of neurolinguistic program that was implanted into us, but it's quite another thing to speculate that with the idea of this kind of structural understanding of sound waves being embedded within it. Again, if there's something to this. Is there? I don't know. That's the whole point of this rough draft that I'm going through right now. And then you get to C. Now we're making a different noise here. C, C, C. But you can see, interesting how that goes, right? The very same thing taking place where C, it's your vocal cords and your tongue and your lips are making the shape through the sound. Now pay attention here because B and D are very similar sounds in terms of the frequency. B, D, but it's like the scales in music where you have the different tones that are similar but different, just different keys of the same tone. And you can kind of see why D is the same symbol as B. It just has a more open shape connecting the line than the B does. The B is more piercing. It's a little sharper than D is. B, D. And you notice that when you say D, you don't put your lips together like you do when you say B. D comes more from your tongue being against the roof of your mouth and hitting the back of your teeth. D, D. Well, I guess now doing it, you don't even touch the back of your teeth. It's just more from the roof of your mouth. D, 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 and your mouth is open in the shape of the D, right? So this is what I'm getting at here. These phonetic symbols seem to have been created by someone who just knew about tones, and the symbol is directly related to the tone that is coming out of the mouth and the shape of it and how it's created in the first place, in other words. Now, pay attention to your mouth again. E, E. You're making the shape, the two ends of the E that come from the line, with your mouth open, the way it makes your neck flare out when you say E, E. And the line is your tongue that is out in the open, in between the shape that your mouth makes when you say E, E. And you can see the E in your mind as you're saying this if you do this exercise correctly. And you can see how your mouth and the sound lines up perfectly with the shape of the letter. And then you go from E to F, and those symbols are very similar. The F is just missing the bottom line. So you go E, F. And you can see how you come down with your teeth onto your bottom lip. F. And you're kind of making that shape with your mouth as the sound is coming out. And then you go to G. And you can see this in your mind as you say G, G, G. You can see how your mouth is making that shape when you say it, G. And then you go to H, H. Your mouth and tongue comes together, and that is the bar that's between the two lines. The two lines are kind of your mouth opening up, H, and coming back down to make that ch, H, H. In that way, you're sort of chomping, and the line is the middle of that chomp. H, H, and then it kind of blows out from the line. That's in between the two bars. And then I is self-explanatory. I mean, you're making the long barred line with your mouth. I. J. Now this one's wild. J, really think about this in your mind and pay attention to the way your mouth moves when you say J. J. If you're like me, your chin and mouth, the lower part of it, moves to the left at the end of the sound. J. J, J, and it's literally making the J symbol. Your mouth is. You're going J, and the little umbrella hook of the J comes around in the same way that your bottom jaw does. J, as you make the sound, J. H, and H is kind of like the extension of J. The same sound, I mean, where you go H, and then J comes right out of the ch. H, J. So they're all kind of connected in that way too, if you pay attention. K, L. I mean, look at the way L is. L, L. You make the symbol with your tongue when you say L. And then you do the same thing with M that you do with B. M is very similar when you bring the mouth together. The top of your lip connects with your bottom lip in the middle, and you have the M, M, M. And that point in the M symbol is that as you make the sound. And then N is very similar. It's just a different variety of M, which is why they're right next to each other and very similar along those lines. M, N. O, so, I mean, that one's obvious. O, you're absolutely making the O sound. People say my O face, you know. It's a crude sexual reference, but they mean like you're having the expression on your face of, oh my gosh, or something like that. And that's oh. It's a literal circle that your mouth is making, and it's the same tone that's coming out through the way that the mouth is operating there. And then P is right next to O. O, P, 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 P. That sound that you're making is the shape of the P. And then this one is like J, where you say Q, Q, Q. And if you pay attention and you say this enough times, you will see that the line that's coming out of the Q is the way that your mouth has to move to make that sound, to pronounce that letter. Q. You have this little offshoot like the J to put yourself in the correct position structurally to make that sound, to create that tone. Q. And that is why the symbol has that little thing that comes off of it. R. R. Yeah, I mean, you can see it in your mind when you do this enough. You can see how you're making the literal R when you make that noise. R. 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 You can see the line coming down, and then it's just like a P, but then there's that one extra little line. And then S is very interesting too. S. S. It's very serpenty. The tone. It's slithering in that way, which is why it's so closely associated with snakes. And when you think about S and Z, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves though, but S and Z are very similar symbols, but the S is softer. S. And the Z is a much more sharp tone, and that's why the symbol Z is a sharp S. T is very similar to H, and T is kind of like cymbals on a drum set. T, T, T. You're making that hammering motion with the sticks, and then you're making contact with the cymbal, and if you imagine the stick making the contact with the cymbal, well, you basically made a T, right? And then U, I mean, that one's obvious too. You can imagine making that movement with your mouth and seeing the U. And then you have V, again, very obvious. V, V, you're making the V with your mouth and the sound. And then you have W, which is a literal double U. W, and you make that shape with your mouth when you say W, W, W. It's wild stuff. X, again, similar to T. You're making that sharp X, X, T, and your mouth is doing a similar thing. And the X is kind of just a T flipped on its side and shortened a little bit. And then when you get to Y, you go, Y, Y. The start of it, think about it like this. The start is Y. And so you kind of start in the middle. And if you imagine the middle of a Y as a dot, and you start right there and you go, Y, you expand out. And you expand out to the right, you expand out to the left, and you expand down from the middle point, which is where your mouth and tongue and jaw is, positionally speaking. It's a point, and you go, Y, and everything expands from there. And then you get to Z, which I already went into. So when you go into the alphabet like that, the whole thing is just wild and crazy. Was there some ancient relative of human beings who came up with all of that, who codified all of these sounds that we are making and turned them into sigils that directly mirrored the sounds and shapes that you were making as these things came out of your vocal cords? I mean, in a similar way, you could imagine birds chirping. To us, it just sounds like it's meaningless, like they're just chirping the same tones over and over again. But to them, it would be like all of these letters are to us. They're making all of these different subtle sounds that are chirps, and they have all these different meanings. And indeed, people who study birds know their language. They know that they're saying certain things in certain ways when they use these various tones, exemplified through chirps. So it's certainly possible that this is something intuitive that we just knew, and it has expressed itself in a wide variety of languages over time until we eventually adopted this one that I'm speaking right now, known as English, that has been chosen to be the world language. And you can see from that how something like what I wrote in 2014 could be somewhat directionally accurate, in the sense that, hey, yeah, this is a sort of neuro-linguistic software program that has been embedded into our minds. And in that way, it's like a capacitor that limits what can be expressed. Because we only have these 26 sigils to express meaning through, and we can only combine them in a certain amount of ways, to the point where the words don't quite capture reality as we are experiencing it fully. And that's very limiting as we grow and expand in what we perceive, and then try to explain it with this limiting language. But that's not to say that it's bad in and of itself, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to communicate with you right now. It serves its purpose in that way, as a form of communication. It's just a matter of intent, as it relates to who and what gave it to us. What are the origins of it? Would we have come up with something completely different that's similar to the birds chirping if we were left to our own devices out in the wild and we eventually started communicating with each other? Or would we have always come up with something like this? Something so refined in this way? Because when you go through the alphabet the way that I went through it, it really does seem like someone with advanced knowledge and understanding cataloged all of these tones and paid attention to the shapes that they were making as the mouth and the vocal cords combined to create them, and then crafted this language around it. And I guess both things could be simultaneously true. Maybe that was how it was originated, and then it was later limiting in the way that the words were constructed. For example, going back to W, when we are describing that symbol, we very literally say that it is two U's put together, a double U. But when the symbol is being used in communication, it produces a different sound when it is constructing a word. An easy example is what. W-H-A-T, what. It's a very wind type of sound that you are making. And if you envision these symbols as some kind of structural engineering, you can say that they very literally place your mouth in that position, in the W position, so that the wind blows out through that shape and produces the sound what. And you can view it in that way for all of the symbols. That's what the structure of the A is for. That's what the structure of the B is for. It's to contain the wind coming through your windpipe and out through your mouth so that it vibrates through there and produces the sound in the same way that cymatics does it with sand and vibrations sent through it. In that way, this is very literally a form of cymatics being practiced on our communication. And along those lines, we can see the hypothesis that some other intelligence might have been so far advanced and capable enough to create something like this and implant it within us. Is that what's going on? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. But when you focus on language in the way that I have done so here, it really becomes a serious question that we need to be asking. For all I know, this is some commonly known thing that linguists talk about. I have no idea. I didn't study it. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe this is something that isn't original in any way, shape, or form. But just in case it is, I got to put it out there for everyone else to consider and hopefully improve on and unlock something along the way as it relates to communication. And indeed, this is why they say that King Arthur pulled the sword from the stone, or the word from the tone. You see, if you pull the word from the tone, that's where the true power of it resides. In that way, you're taking the vibration over and using it to convey meaning outside of the confines of these structures that your mouth is being placed in to pronounce the sigils and the words that are based on the sigils. Fascinating stuff, right? I mean, hopefully I'm not alone here. This is amazing. Yet another of the great mysteries here, just how we communicate and where all of this came from. And hopefully I didn't waste your time with all of this and you got something out of it. But with that, I'll leave it there. Later.